Law Matters. Of course it does. Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. This program has been created to educate, inform, and help you with the law matters because the law matters. If you understand the law better, you're in a better position to decide how to protect yourself, your family, and your business. As always, we say we provide information and resources to help you decide whether you need or want to contact a lawyer. Perhaps we'll help you determine that you might be able to handle some issues yourself. If you do decide to contact outside professional counsel, you'll be better prepared, and as a result, so will the professionals you decide to choose. And either way, of course, our goal is to help save you time, money, and hopefully achieve better results. The Bazar and Associates Law Firm in East Providence continue to donate their time and their experience and their insights, and as usual, we want to welcome and thank David Bazar.
Thank you, Debbie.
So today, ballot questions. Ballot measures often are contentious, they're hot button issues. This year is no exception. And there's a wide range of ballot questions. We're going to focus on things locally, but among the list are things like marijuana, gun control, universal health care, minimum wage. There are lots of controversial topics. One, there's a referendum in California, a first-in-the-nation statewide ban against plastic bags, which is going to be interesting. There's an initiative about a new voting system in Maine, and get this one, in California, there's one that's designed to require condoms to be used in pornographic films. We'll stick closer to home. This year, in Massachusetts, there are 4 questions. Rhode Island has 7. In the past, we have provided some information and had, from Rhode Island, Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea provide some information. She also has a postal mailing that we have that gives you information on what you need to know about being a voter. In Massachusetts, they also have distributed information which is from William Francis Galvin, the Secretary of the Commonwealth. We hope that that's helpful to you, and if you didn't receive it, you certainly can still get it. You certainly also can go to, here's a good resource, the ballotpedia.org. It's an encyclopedia of American politics. You can look up ballot questions, find out about procedures, find out where you should vote, and let's get to it. Let's start with Massachusetts, David. Ready?
Ready.
Okay, so in Massachusetts, number 1 in their listing, and I don't know how they arbitrarily listed these, but first one is second slot location. So as it reads, it's an indirect initiated state statute, which means the citizens got to put this on the ballot. So a vote of yes supports this proposal to grant Massachusetts Gaming Commission the ability to issue an additional slots license, and a no vote opposes this proposal, retaining the current law that allows 3 resort casinos and 1 slot parlor. What do we figure about that? Is that a very contentious issue? What do you think about it?
Okay, so my understanding, as you say, the citizens got to put that on the ballot, is that there was one particular individual who was very interested in that question because he's a real estate developer from Thailand with ties to Massachusetts who wants to put a slot parlor at the Park and Revere, Suffolk Downs. So that's just an expansion of what already exists. To me, it would be more of a question of the people around Suffolk Downs, how they feel. But yes, that's what it's about.
In the overview, they talk about it being a slots-only license. They talk about it being a Category 2, which is attached to a horse racing facility, and they refer to Plain Ridge, of course, which has a slots-only parlor. Whether or not that's likely to help horse racing is in question. You bring up the side that's against it, which is it's only going to help some wealthy individual rather than just help the state. Usually every state, including Rhode Island, has said if we have additional gambling, or if we have gambling at all, it brings in revenue to the state and it brings in jobs.
Right. So I think that's true, and there is something to be said for that. The issue is, if you're looking at it from a perspective of it helps horse racing, or in Rhode Island when they did it, the slot parlor, there was highlight. The dog track in Lincoln, where Twin Rivers is, originally was slot parlor, with dog racing there. It seems to me that the history shows that whatever the attached facility is, horse racing, highlight, dog racing, eventually goes away. and it becomes a slot parlor, and then eventually a casino.
And apparently there was some discussion about the MGM in Springfield and Wynn, Boston Harbor holding resort casino licenses. So I think that's yet another issue about here, how much are they really expanding it? Of course, those who oppose it will always say that it's just promoting more problems on numerous levels and more of a drain to the individual rather than it just being a revenue enhancer for the state.
And that's always the argument. It's the same argument when there were no casinos in Rhode Island or Massachusetts yet, but there will be, as to all of the negative issues that are surrounding casinos going in. Some of the argument has been that the casino drains money from the economy. It doesn't help grow the economy. It doesn't add revenue. It takes away because of all of the surrounding businesses that either can't compete or go out of business or whatever. Now, if you look at your experience here, I've never done an economic study of it. I can't tell you whether any of those arguments are valid, but from just an individual's looking at it, I think that it has not been as negative as the opponents would lead you to believe.
Interesting. And I always wonder when they start looking at economic impact, and of course they always use that as leverage no matter which side of the fence they're on. And in arguments in favor, they're saying $80 million they're proposing in new revenue to the state of Massachusetts, $12 million to support horse racing. We don't know how that happens, and as you indicate, how long it's going to take because they often liquidate the idea of doing horse racing. Thousands of new jobs, direct and indirect, for Massachusetts, and $5 million guaranteed new revenue for the host city. That should be interesting to see whether or not that happens, or how that happens.
And we'll talk about it, I guess, a little bit more when we get to the Rhode Island ballot questions. But I would start in my own study or view is, well, let's start with Connecticut because they were first and they've been there the longest. And what has the impact been on Connecticut? And from what I know that their revenues are down from many years ago, but from what I've seen, the University of Connecticut, which was a beneficiary of some of the money, really expanded their facilities and did very well with it. The state of Connecticut brought in a lot of money for state government as a result of it. And the areas surrounding Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun don't seem to be that much worse for the wear, if at all. Now, there's always some crime and issues that happen along these lines, but I don't, at least it's not been publicized, so as far as I know, it's not been really that bad at all.
Interestingly, whenever there's a new slot, a new resort, initially there's an influx of cash because there's always the curiosity factor, but whether or not that's a sustainable thing, considering we've got two here, one there, another one here, another one proposed there. One thing we do know that in Mass and Rhode Island, which are so close in so many ways, Massachusetts, that has its ballot question, has been advertising heavily in Rhode Island, never mind just in Massachusetts, and I'm sure that vice versa, that's been happening. When we talked briefly about this being a year for citizen initiatives, interestingly, one of those who happens to oppose this issue refers to this particular proclamation or question being a flagrant abuse of the ballot question process because, as you brought up earlier, it's only helping one developer, they're saying.
Right.
I don't know that it's not going to help others, but certainly clearly one is attached to it.
Theoretically, that is part of the issue. I agree with that. But it's on the ballot, and the question is whether or not it does help just one person, or if it's a good policy and direction for the state to go, Commonwealth, to go in terms of expanding what's already been approved.
Yes. Let's move on to another question. Oh, by the way, I don't know if we need to say this, but Charlie Baker has opposition to that, not surprisingly. Okay, so number 2, what else is happening with number 2? We have another major issue, which is, let me see if I remember these. Okay, so the next is the charter school, always an issue. We'll talk about it, I guess, in Rhode Island as well, but the Massachusetts authorization of additional charter schools and charter school expansion, question number 2. We figure yes means yes, you can authorize up to 12, and no says there won't be, and there is, as it says, no vote opposes the proposal to authorize up to 12 new charter schools or enrollment expansions in existing charter schools, thereby maintaining the current cap.
Which I think is 120 charter schools in Massachusetts. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's where they're at right now.
And yet they say that there are something like 37,000 children who want to be in charter schools, and there's no room at the inn, so to speak. So they're claiming that they should have a reason to expand them. In Rhode Island, we talk about that pulling money away from the public schools. Massachusetts is saying not so.
That's what they say. And I guess the question then becomes is, how is it being funded if it's not at the cost of the public school? That's the question that needs to be answered on the one side. On the other hand, even if it is taking money from the public school, but if it's putting it in a direction that you're getting a better return on your educational dollar, and it's providing a better education than currently exists for people who can't get into these charter schools, then maybe it's a better dollar more wisely spent.
You know, it's interesting. We figure that it's a right to have quality education. Not all school systems have it. Those who support the argument and want the charter schools say that this is really meant to help the urban communities where they're less likely to have quality schools. On the other side, people like Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren, says, Massachusetts has great public schools anyway, and we shouldn't have to do this. We'll see how that one flushes out. Interestingly enough, San Antonio, as an aside here, David, they had a Supreme Court issue that said, isn't it true that every child should be entitled to a quality public education as a matter of constitution? And I guess they said yes, which gave rise to other issues, but yes.
Well, that's the same argument that went into a lot of other decisions in Supreme Court decisions on education and busing and all of those issues. And separate but equal wasn't acceptable. It was the evolution to where we are today. And the question is, are we giving the best opportunity to our children for education? And that's a really important and critical issue going forward for the next 1,000 of years, hopefully. But most importantly, for the children today, if you build 12 new charter schools, is that what it is?
That's what they're saying, yes.
So does that give that many more children an opportunity to get a better education and get themselves ahead in the world? And again, I've not studied Massachusetts, so I don't know, does it come from public funds for public schools or does it not? And how does that all work? But I'm a big proponent of giving a student who's got the desire and the ability and the opportunity to get the best education they can. And if this is a way to do that, then that's something I think that should very much be considered.
I know when we talk about it in Rhode Island, we always hear the money follows the student. So does that drain from the public school system and making what had been great less great? Does it? I don't know. But certainly every time they talk about building another school, they're saying that there's more money that's required to a cost of $1 billion more every year, apparently. Where does that come from, as you indicate? We don't know where that is, but certainly that's got to be a question for anybody who's concerned about containing costs.
Sure.
On a related topic about how these initiatives are crafted, the actual petition, David says, enact to allow fair access to public charter schools. Does that slant someone's reading of about how they should vote? Because wouldn't everyone say that there should be fair access?
Sure, and so in some ways that's true, because from what I heard and understand about the whole subject is that, as you said, did you say 37,000?
37,000 kids in the queue.
Would like to be able to go and have applied and signed up and haven't gotten in because they haven't had the chance because there's not enough capacity to take them. So it does increase the chance if there are 12 additional charter schools for them to be able to apply to and go to and all that. Fair, I guess, is the question that you have a question on as to whether fair is fair.
Fair.
And then the other hand is how many people actually read the whole question and read fair, or do they just look charter schools, yes or no?
True. Let's move on. An unusual one, perhaps, but I think it was prompted by something that happened in the news in Westport about a farm that had animals that were certainly not well cared for, to say the least. So question 3, the Massachusetts minimum size requirements for farm animal containment is question 3. So a vote for yes supports the proposal to prohibit the sale of eggs, veal, or pork of a farm animal confined in spaces that prevent the animal from lying down, standing up, extending its limbs, or turning around. And a no opposes it. Interestingly enough, you can bet that that's attached to money somehow, correct?
Yeah, I would assume, although I can't see really how much, from a state government budgetary issue, I don't think there's any impact on it there.
You wouldn't think so.
No. So I guess then the question becomes is how do you vote no against that?
So the thought or the opposition says, if we do that, it's not fair because a basic form of protein, namely eggs, which should be inexpensive, and when families need to support and take care of their family, now the cost of eggs is going to be going up.
Because the
How
chickens
much?
should have a cage that they can stand in?
Because they can have a cage that they can stand in, space that they can turn around in, which was quoted as necessarily being a little bit larger than a piece of paper, a sheet of paper. I
Right.
assume 8.5 by 11.
Right. What are you going to pay, a penny more in eggs so your chicken can stand?
Good question. Or the other side of it, those who oppose it also say, but if we have this in Massachusetts, and of course there are farms that have chickens that raise eggs and produce eggs that they're selling, but what does that do when another state ships in eggs? Then
Right.
it's unfair to
How do you
those.
regulate
How do you
that?
regulate?
There's a good question on that. But it reminds me of Warren Beatty in the movie Heaven Can Wait. And they had a company where they were catching tuna, and every now and then they were netting dolphins. And they said, well, we got to do something to stop that, and it was going to cost a little bit more. So Warren Beatty looks and says, wouldn't you pay 10 cents more per can of tuna to save a fish that can think? It's not really a fish, but it can think.
It can think.
So that, it reminds me of that. It just seems to me that it only makes sense that you should have some, I'm going to use the word humanity,
Yes.
in dealing with your animals.
I mean, when you think about how many people care about having free range everything, and in
Right.
this case, you have a chicken that can't turn around.
Yeah, exactly.
So now the more popular, contentious, and also the highest supported campaign issue, question number 4 about marijuana, another indirect initiated state statute. So a vote for yes says that the proposal is to legalize marijuana but regulate it similar to alcoholic beverages, and a vote for no says this proposal to legalize recreational marijuana, keeping only medical marijuana legal. That's what's up for grabs here. So there's been commission supposedly that says now we will be able to regulate it. Of course, they regulate it. That means they tax it. That means revenue. And yet there are many people who are saying certainly we should be doing that. Your thoughts or comments on that?
Well, again, I haven't studied, tell me Colorado, right?
Colorado's
Who else?
elite. I don't know all of them.
Okay,
It's a
I think
good
there's
question.
5.
Oh, Arizona, California, Maine, and Nevada are also going to be deciding on legalization.
Okay. And
That's recreational, not
recreational.
medical.
And I think there's 3 or 4 or 5 that already have legalized it to some
Yes.
degree or another. So I would like, if it were something, obviously I live in Rhode Island, if it was something on the ballot in Rhode Island, what I would want to do is study what's going on in the states that have already done it, what has the impact been, how have they regulated it, how do they make sure that the stuff being sold is being taxed appropriately, as we said, for some revenue enhancement, and what downside has there been in the states where it's already been legalized. So that's, I would want to study those things.
A couple of things as an aside to mention. Those who wanted to tax and regulate it have said, well, then it's going to cost so much more than those who just get it from their neighbor's cousin's friend.
Right.
Illicit
Yeah,
as
yeah,
it
yeah.
is,
I
and
get
it
it.
happens.
Yeah.
Yet in Massachusetts, they're saying if they make it legalized retail, it's going to be subject to state tax with an additional 3.75% excise tax. If it chooses a local municipality, could add another 2%. So all of these things, plus revenue will come from license application fees, fines for minor violations, et cetera, et cetera. So you're seeing some certainly additional cost for this recreational use. Not that we didn't have additional taxes on tobacco,
Right.
on alcohol, and all the rest of those sin things.
Yeah, and I don't have a real big problem with that. It's, to me, a much better way for the government to raise money than just to raise taxes on people. So that, to me, is okay, because there's also a cost to regulating it correctly so that you have a proper product in the marketplace and
Yes.
all of those things. I don't have a problem with some taxation on top of that in exchange for making it legal and regulated correctly. I still would want to know some of the other indirect impacts it's going to have. And again, I would
Such as
want...
gateway
Well,
drug to...
that's one issue, and what has that issue been in Colorado, for example? How about this? And this is something that I've, thought about a bit. In Rhode Island with the DUI, clearly it's easy to read the level of alcohol in you to determine whether or not you're under the influence while you're driving. What happens when you're under the influence of marijuana and you've done it to excess and it impacts your ability to drive? How do you regulate driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol, drugs being the more difficult thing to regulate? And there, in the old days, as I say, with alcohol, we used to have a statute that didn't have the numbers in it, so to speak, and so it was on observation. And perhaps you can do it with observation too, but then there has to be the ability to test for the presence, at least, of it in your system. And then the problem with that is you might not have any marijuana in your system that's affecting you at the particular moment that you get caught driving, but if you had something within the last 30 days or something, then it's still going to be traceable in your system. So there's that issue. So there are other issues to consider. But again, it's something that other states have already started to do, so I'd like to know how they're addressing those issues.
It's a good point. You raised several important issues with it. Of course, people have always said the impact with marijuana is you're going to have a car full of Cheetos because you're going to have that as a sort of as a direct effect. But when they talk about it being decriminalized, so if it becomes recreational, yes, it's good that it'll be regulated, but also you'll have, gee, David, you'll have fewer people coming to see you because they've been arrested for illegally having pot. It's decriminalized. At least that means you'll have fewer people in jail, fewer people needing lawyers.
Again, you know what, that's okay. I'll have more people charged with driving under the influence, so we'll make up for it that way.
It's good. So when they talk about replacing this dangerous underground, I think that, as you point out, and I guess as most of us who've been following this issue, Rhode Island, Mass, or across the country, I can admit I did not know that there were so many different variations and strains of marijuana, one that will help you if you have arthritis, one if you have some other nerve damage or cancer or whatever. So it'll be very interesting to see if they can get more of a leash on what's doing what to whom.
Right. I think it's actually a good area of study, and like I said, there's so many different issues that it impacts society in so many different ways that those things are what needs to be looked at before you go forward. And I think that that's a good idea.
So in the very limited time that we have left, we have 7 issues in Rhode Island to cover. And not surprisingly, many of them are about bonds and about money. And you made a remark about how they've listed them based on almost what did we say? We calculated almost
$200 and some odd million dollars
that they're asking for. So what are your favorites?
Well, you want to do the bonds first?
Let's do the bonds.
So, well, there's the bond for URI. I told you I love education.
Higher education,
anything we can do to support and expand the opportunities for students in education, really important. So that's one. I know
Question 4, that is.
Okay. All right. Then there's one for the ports, Providence and Davisville. And that is to improve the infrastructure at both ports. Go ahead.
So that's $70 million, question 5.
20 for Providence, 50 for Davisville.
Higher education, how about Rhode Island housing bonds, question 7, it says $50 million in general obligation bonds to fund affordable housing and urban revitalization.
Yeah.
And that's number 7. Number 6, green economy. I'm not sure why they wanted to just, obviously we have remediation issues that have to be taken care of, brownfields, whatever. So Question 6, $35 million for environmental and recreational purposes, and I believe that that even includes some of our bikeways either being built in South County.
There's a number of, it breaks it down into different individual environmental and recreational things that will be impacted by that.
And Veterans Home.
Veterans Home, to build a new Veterans Home.
So considering that so many people are talking about how the vets aren't cared for, even though that certainly means money, it's likely, very likely to have people who care about vets bring particular attention to them like never before. So not about money.
Well, before you leave the money, those are all really good, justifiable projects. It is a lot of money. I will say the interest rates are low, and you know, to fund things with low interest rate environments is good, but I would hope that somebody has done a budgetary impact to see how these things would affect the budget.
And in fact, as you bring this up, Nellie, Secretary of State, had issued this voter information handbook, and as it lists the pros, the cons, the overview, it also has a small chart that indicates what the principal is, interest is, how long it's likely to last, what its actual cost is likely to be beyond these round numbers that they quote in the ballot question. So do your due diligence.
Correct.
Ethics Commission. So Rhode Island Ethics Commission Amendment Question 2. A vote for yes supports providing Ethics Commission with authority to investigate alleged misconduct regarding legislative activities. No opposes it. So we've had that come up before.
So as you remember, this was a case that went to the Rhode Island Supreme Court to determine whether or not the Ethics Commission had jurisdiction to hear cases of ethical complaints against senators and reps. And the statute didn't give them authority to do that because the Constitution gave immunity to senators and reps in the processing of their stands and issues that they do in the legislature.
Called the speech and debate clause. That was a very contentious issue.
Correct.
It's back.
Right. So this amendment would change the rules so that the Ethics Commission does have authority over senators and reps if they wanted to bring an ethics violation in front of the board.
And of course, pay attention to that because it's 2 months during their stint and 2 days after their time as speech and debate. So let's conclude where we began. Rhode Island has also a Twin River Casino in Tiverton, question number 1. Same issue about shall we have another casino?
Right. Well, slot parlor at first, correct?
Slot parlor at first.
Would it become a casino?
Who knows, likely.
All right. So Newport doesn't seem to really want anything done with the casino at the current location where Highlight used to be. Moving it to Tiverton, a little bit closer to Massachusetts, maybe draw some of the funds from Massachusetts to Rhode Island that would be dedicated towards gambling. You know, it's just moving what already exists a little closer to Massachusetts. If you live in Rhode Island, how can you not love that?
True. And that's the last word. We hope that you have become better informed about your ballot issues and get out the vote. Do vote. Pay attention, and thanks for tuning in to The Law Matters. Do stay tuned. The Law Matters to you.